if the affordability crisis is not just a market failure, but a reflection of a deeper internal and cultural misalignment? Welcome to The Valuation Metric, a podcast about the risks, rewards, roadblocks, and revelations reshaping the way that we measure worth. I'm your host, Sara Gutterman, CEO of Green Builder Media, North America's leading media company focused on green building and sustainable living. Across our economy, our culture, and our housing market, we're measuring the wrong things. We're rewarding extraction over regeneration, accumulation over stewardship, and discord over peace. I believe that the metrics that we have been relying on, such as price per square foot, quarterly earnings, and GDP growth, have played a meaningful role in creating the affordability crisis that we now find ourselves in. Namely, because cheap upfront almost always means expensive forever, especially when we're talking about massive economic assets like homes. In the first episode of the Valuation Metric podcast, I laid out the argument for why the construction sector needs to shift from price per square foot to value per square foot. That conversation focused on the mechanics of valuation. But lately, I've been thinking about the issue from a different angle. If we're measuring the wrong things externally, is that an indication that something inside of us has drifted out of alignment? If our homes have become commodities, if our neighborhoods have become financial instruments, if our culture celebrates unbridled growth while starving for meaning, perhaps that's not just an economic failure. Perhaps it's a crisis of consciousness. So, what if value isn't what we think it is? There's an idea worth sitting with for just a moment. What if value is not something that's fixed or objective, but something shaped by perception? Quantum physics tells us that what appears as solid is at its core energy, frequency, vibration, which means that what we experience as reality is interpreted, filtered, and constructed. If that's true, then the way that we measure value is not merely technical. It's psychological, it's cultural, and it's spiritual. If that's the case, then we don't measure what's actually, quote, real, because real is relative. We measure what we are able or willing to see. And that distinction matters both in the economy and as a whole and specifically in the housing market. It matters in the way that we understand our own lives. If we're only equipped to value what is visible, immediate, and easily quantified, then we will inevitably miss the things that make life meaningful and the things that make homes truly valuable. So let's talk about this invisible layer of value. When we evaluate a home, we tend to focus on the obvious. Square footage, price, comparable sales, finishes, location. These are the visible markers of value, and they dominate the conversation because they're easy to quantify and simple to compare. But what are we not measuring? What are we not adequately measuring with respect to resilience, indoor air quality, energy independence, mental well-being, long-term cost, stability, and peace of mind? In other words, we're measuring the visible layer of value while ignoring the experiential layer of value. And that's not just an oversight, it's a systemic blind spot. A home is not just a physical structure, it's the container in which life unfolds, where relationships form, where children grow, dreams incubate, bodies heal, and identities take shape. It's where people retreat when the world becomes too loud, too hostile, or too uncertain. If our homes are broken, chances are we're not just looking at a construction problem. We're looking at a human problem. If the place that you live supports your health, lowers your stress, protects your family, conserves resources, and stabilizes your finances, that has ripple effects far beyond the walls of your home. It affects relationships. It affects your work. It affects your civic participation. It affects your children. It affects your capacity for generosity. It affects your capacity to imagine a better future. And that's why the valuation problem is ultimately a meaning problem. So we live in this fantasy of control. We try so hard to engineer the outcome of our lives that we end up compartmentalizing everything. Work from family, body from mind, soul from success. We divide life into these neat categories and hope that somehow the pieces will add up to wellness and to wholeness. The same fragmentation that shows up in our personal lives is mirrored in our systems. We have separated price from value, cost from consequence, housing from health, construction from climate, and profit from purpose. And then in so doing, fear has become the hidden architect. It's no surprise that our systems are failing to support us because many of them have been built on fear, and fear is a dangerous architect. Fear in people produces defensive behavior. Fear in companies produces short-termism, short-term thinking. Fear in markets produces overcorrection, underinvestment, and myopia. Fear in builders produces value engineering that strips homes down to code minimum. Fear in lenders produces rigid underwriting that can't recognize innovation. Fear in insurers produces blunt risk models that can't distinguish resilient homes from non-resilient ones, from fragile homes. Fear narrows imagination. And a system governed by fear will almost always default to the cheapest, easiest, most familiar path, even when that path generates greater long-term harm. We see this clearly in the race to the bottom in housing. In a down market, the instinct is to cut cost, strip features, compress value, and compete solely on price. But that instinct is often fear masquerading as discipline. It's the external manifestation of scarcity thinking. It's what happens when people and institutions believe that they can't afford depth, quality, or long-term vision. And here's the paradox of cheap upfront. Fear-driven systems often create the very instability that they're trying to avoid. A cheaper house creates more warranty claims. A less resilient community creates more insurance risk. A bare minimum product forces builders to offer more incentives, yields slower sales, and erodes brand trust. A lower first cost creates a much higher full cost. Cheap is not affordable. It's deferred pain. It's cost shifting disguised as value. It transfers risk from the builder to the buyer, from the short term to the long term, and from the spreadsheet to the human nervous system. It pushes the true cost of bad decisions downstream and then calls the result affordability. That's not a pricing strategy. It's a moral failure. However, there's a shift that's already happening. Signs are emerging all around us that we're entering a new era, one in which value creation, not cost cutting, will separate the winners from the laggards. In an uncertain market, homes stop selling on momentum and start selling on merit. And merit is no longer just about aesthetics or square footage. It's about resilience, wellness, independence, performance, and the ability to support long-term prosperity and generational wealth creation. Resilience is the ability to withstand climate shocks and extreme weather. Wellness is the ability to protect human health. Independence is the ability to maintain power and water when systems fail. Performance is the ability to reduce long-term operating costs. And prosperity is the ability to support generational wealth rather than to erode it. That's not a niche trend. It's a cultural correction, coming just in time, given that the old model is failing in plain sight. The grid is unstable, insurance markets are stressed, climate volatility is increasing, affordability is collapsing under the weight of first cost thinking and deferred consequence. People are lonely, anxious, isolated, and exhausted. Our politics are divisive, and the places that we build often deepen those realities instead of relieving them. But this is where the conversation becomes really interesting. If our external systems are misaligned, what does that mean about our internal ones? There's a simple idea that applies to both internal and external systems. Conscious thought plus action equals manifestation. The Buddha taught, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Every home we build starts as a thought, a vision, a possibility. Then through action, it becomes a reality. The same is true for any product or any system throughout our economy. And the same is true for our lives. Which means that if we want to change what we are building and creating externally, it's important to examine what we are believing internally. What assumptions are we carrying about success, risk, worth, and scarcity? What hidden fears are shaping our decisions? What internal fragmentation is being externalized into the systems that we create? That line of inquiry opens the door to broader cultural questions, too. How do we define success? What do we reward? What do we externalize? What do we normalize? What kind of future are our metrics quietly manufacturing? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They're embedded in every house we build, every mortgage we underwrite, every appraisal comp we run, every spreadsheet we create, every return we report on. These are foundational questions that we must start asking ourselves if we're going to build a future that has real value. So let's go back to this concept that value is relational. A home has value, not just because of what it costs to build, but really what it holds together. Families, memories, daily rituals, quiet after chaos, a sense of continuity in a fractured world. If you live in a house that is constantly too hot, too cold, too noisy, too toxic, too expensive to maintain, that affects your mood, your health, your relationships, your financial stress, your sleep, your sense of safety, that house is not a sanctuary. It's a source of depletion. But the reverse is also true. A well-designed home can be your partner in life. It can lower your costs, protect your health, stabilize your finances, and create the conditions for something much more than survival. It can create the conditions for a meaningful life. And that is what really differentiates a commodity from a sanctuary. Ultimately, the valuation problem is a meaning problem. We're not just undercounting performance features. We're miscalculating the very conditions that support life: trust, safety, belonging, peace of mind, durability, independence, beauty, health, resilience, love. Yet we've built an economy that systematically discounts these fundamentals, as if they were optional, sentimental, or secondary. They are not. They are the basic conditions that allow people to flourish. If we continue to treat these elements as peripheral, we will continue to build homes and systems that underperform where it matters most. All of Green Builder Media's Cognition Smart data shows that buyers increasingly want homes that deliver resilience, health, lower operating costs, and peace of mind, not as luxury add-ons or upgrades, but as the baseline of value. The market is slowly, imperfectly, beginning to catch up to a truth that should have been obvious all along. Quality of life matters. Safety matters. The future matters. The planet matters. If the place where you live supports your health, lowers your stress, protects your family, conserves natural resources, and stabilizes your financing, that impacts your entire life far beyond the walls of your home. It affects your relationships, your work, your children, your capacity for generosity, your capacity to imagine a better future. When we stop perceiving value as something that we extract from the world, we can start seeing it as something that we cultivate in relationship with our world. If we stop asking, what does it cost, and begin asking questions like, what does it protect? What does it restore? What does it make possible? What does it honor? What does it hold together? That shift in thinking has the potential to change everything: business, culture, housing, and perhaps most importantly, ourselves. We have to become capable of seeing that a home can either deplete or nourish, that a market can either extract or regenerate, that a culture can either normalize fear or cultivate trust, that an economy can either reward fragmentation or support wholeness. So I ask you to pause for a moment and consider, what kind of a world are our thoughts building? What kind of a world are our metrics building? What kind of a world are our homes and our current economic systems building? If the answers trouble you, well, maybe that's a good thing, because that means there's still enough sensitivity left in the system and in you to recognize misalignment. And if we can recognize misalignment, then we can choose differently. No doubt, we are living in a moment of turbulence. Geopolitical tension, climate shocks, economic uncertainty, technological disruption, mental anxiety. But as the former Unilever CEO Paul Polman says, history tells us something important. The greatest periods of progress are rarely calm. They emerge in moments exactly like this, moments of transition, uncertainty, and sometimes even fear. The key lesson here, though, is that we are not powerless, nor are we trapped inside immutable systems. We are participants in shaping what comes next. While our systems are so fixated on transactional logic that they often miss transformational reality, they are not static. Metrics are man-made, markets are man-made, policies are man-made, valuation models are man-made, which means that they can all be remade, as can we. So think about it this way. If we build supportive homes, we can heal people. If we heal people, we can heal external systems. If we heal external systems, we can heal our culture. And if we heal our culture, we create the conditions under which we can heal the planet as well. That's why I no longer see housing just as shelter or even real estate transactions. Housing is really an infrastructure for human flourishing. It's emotional, biological, economic, and cultural infrastructure. One of my favorite quotes comes from the ancient Zen master Dojin. If you cannot find the truth right where you are, where do you expect to find it? That question asks us to stop looking outside of ourselves for answers, to stop assuming that meaning lives in the next acquisition, the next promotion, the next move, the next market cycle, the next technology, the next thing, the next relationship. Truth is not somewhere else. Value is not somewhere else. It's right here, inside, if we are willing to recognize it. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian author and psychologist, said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Perhaps that's our invitation before us right now. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Valuation Metric. I'm Sara Gutterman, reminding you to measure what matters. When we do that, we will build a future that has true value.
Before you click away, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast wherever you listen. And don't miss the daily coverage on sustainability, housing, and what's next for home building at greenbuildermedia.com. Stay informed, stay ahead.